The quiet helper, the first snowfall of winter, arrived with unexpected fury, transforming Pinewood into a postcard-perfect town that Julia Winters both loved and dreaded. Beautiful as it was, the snow meant fewer customers at second-hand stories, the small bookstore she'd poured her life savings into 3 years ago. Julia wiped condensation from the window, watching as downtown emptied while people hurried home before the storm worsened. The weather report had predicted a few gentle inches, not this swirling tempest that had already dropped 6 inches and showed no signs of slowing. "Last call for book browsers," she called to the empty shop, her voice echoing against shelves, of well-loved novels and forgotten memoirs. No response, as expected. She hadn't had a customer in over 2 hours. As she began closing procedures, counting the meager day's earnings, turning down the thermostat, and organizing the new arrivals, heart movement outside caught her attention. A figure huddled in the recessed doorway of the vacant storefront across the street, barely visible through the thickening snow. Julia hesitated. Pinewood wasn't known for homeless populations. Most struggled souls migrated to Portland when the weather turned. But occasionally, someone passed through. The figure hadn't moved for at least 30 minutes. With temperatures dropping below freezing, that was concerning. "Not your problem," she muttered, continuing her closing routine. But her eyes kept returning to the window. The manuscript pages of her unfinished novel sat accusingly on the counter, the story of a woman who found courage in unexpected places. Julia sighed. "I'm clearly not that woman tonight," but something tugged at her. Perhaps it was her grandmother's voice in her head. "Kindness costs nothing, child, but its absence costs everything." Before she could reconsider, Julia bundled up, grabbed the thermos of coffee she'd made for her evening writing session, and ventured into the storm. "Hello?" she called, approaching cautiously. "Would you like some coffee? It's getting dangerous. Out here." The figure shifted. A man's face emerged from a weather-beaten hood, mid-40s perhaps, with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed beard that suggested recent efforts at maintenance despite difficult circumstances. "I'm fine, thank you," he replied, his voice surprisingly gentle and articulate. "Just waiting out the worst before moving on." "Moving where?" "The forecast says this is getting worse until morning." He gestured vaguely eastward. "There's a sheltered spot by the river," Julia frowned. "That's 5 miles in this weather." She hesitated, then decided. "Look, I have a back room at the bookstore with a decent couch. You can stay tonight just until the storm passes." Wariness crossed his face. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" "Because it's 20 degrees and dropping," she answered simply. "And because my grandmother would haunt me if I left someone in a doorway during a blizzard?" A ghost of a smile. "I'm Warren," he said finally. "Julia. I own secondhand stories." She nodded toward her shop. "It's warm, there's coffee, and I promise not to ask invasive questions if you promise not to steal my first edition Vonnegut's." Warren stood slowly, revealing his full height. He carried a weatherproof backpack and moved with a slight limp. "No interest in your Vonnegut's, more of a Steinbeck man myself." "Well then, we might get along just fine," Julia replied, leading him across the empty street. "I've got East of Eden in 3 different printings. Neither could have known that this simple act of kindness, a shelter from a storm, would alter both their lives in ways impossible to imagine, connecting their futures like the delicate threads of a story neither had yet written. Paperboat's winter gradually released its grip on Pinewood, and what began as a one-night arrangement evolved into something unexpected. Warren became a fixture at second-hand stories, first as Julia's reluctant guest in the back room, then as an unofficial handyman fixing the temperamental heating system and wobbly bookshelves that had plagued her for years. "You never mentioned you were good with your hands," Julia remarked one afternoon, watching him restore an antique reading chair that customers had avoided for its alarming tendency to collapse. Warren shrugged, his focus unwavering on the joint. He was reinforcing. "There's a lot I haven't mentioned." That was true. In 2 months of cohabitation, her in her small apartment above the shop, him in the gradually improved back room, Warren had revealed precious little about himself. Julia knew he'd served in the military, gathered from nightmares that occasionally woke them both. She knew he had once designed buildings, information that slipped out when he sketched improvements for her store's layout. And she knew he folded. Exquisite origami when his hands needed occupation, delicate cranes, stars, and his specialty, intricately detailed paper boats. "My father taught me," he explained during a rare moment of openness, folding a sheet of paper with practiced precision. "He said boats are important because they don't just stay in one place, they journey, carrying pieces of everywhere they've been." Julia's customers grew fond of the quiet man who recommended architecture books and historical fiction with surprising insight. Some left extra tips in the coffee jar for the book wizard, as Mrs. Peterson called him. Julia noticed how Warren set these aside, never spending a cent on himself. In the evenings, they established a companionable routine. Warren would listen as Julia read aloud from her manuscript, a story about a woman restoring an old lighthouse, offering occasional suggestions that proved remarkably insightful. Julia never pressed about his past, but piece by piece a picture emerged. "I designed a community center once," he mentioned, while helping reorganize the architecture section. It was going to revitalize a struggling neighborhood in Seattle. The funding collapsed when the economy tanked in 2008. Everything fell apart after that. Julia understood there was more, much more to the story, but respected the boundaries Warren maintained. What mattered was the present. Her bookstore was running more smoothly than ever, her writing had found new direction, and for the first time since opening secondhand stories, she felt she wasn't facing everything alone. Then came the Tuesday, morning in April, when Julia descended from her apartment to find Warren's space immaculately clean, his few possessions gone. On the counter sat a single paper boat, more elaborate than any he'd made before. A perfect miniature schooner complete with tiny paper sails. Beneath it, an envelope containing the money he'd saved from the tips, along with a note, "Julia. Some debts can't be repaid with just money, but it's a start. You gave me shelter when I needed it most. Now I need to build something new. Thank you for reminding me that stories don't end until we choose to stop writing them. Warren." No forwarding address, no phone number, just a paper boat and words that felt simultaneously like gratitude and goodbye. Julia placed the boat carefully on the shelf behind the register beside her grandmother's photo. "You always did have terrible timing," she told the little schooner, swallowing the unexpected lump in her throat. That evening, she opened her manuscript and created a new character, an architect who folded paper boats and carried stories across oceans. Life continued. The bookstore weathered seasons, economic fluctuations, and the growing challenge of e-books. Julia's novel found an agent, but not a publisher. She dated occasionally, but never felt the connection she sought. And sometimes, in quiet moments between customers, her eyes would drift to the paper boat, wondering about the man who had sailed away without a proper goodbye. Tides of change 7 years transformed Pinewood. The quaint downtown now featured artisanal coffee shops and boutiques catering to tourists seeking small-town charm. Through it all, second-hand stories remained stubbornly unchanged, a haven of worn armchairs and floor-to-ceiling shelves where regulars could escape the encroaching modernity. But survival came at a cost. Julia's accountant delivered the verdict with sympathetic grimness. Without significant investment, the bookstore had perhaps 6 months before financial reality forced its closure. "What about your writing?" asked Donna, Julia's closest friend and part-time employee. "Didn't that agent call about your lighthouse novel?" Julia shook her head, rearranging a display of local authors that featured her modest contribution, a collection of short stories published by a small press. Marissa said it's beautifully written but not commercially viable in the current market. Translation, it won't sell enough copies to justify the investment. The irony wasn't lost on her, a bookstore owner whose books weren't deemed worthy of larger bookshelves. Some dreams remained stubbornly out of reach despite years of effort. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Exactly 7 years since she'd found Warren's paper boat. The law firm's envelope contained documents indicating an anonymous benefactor wished to establish a literary foundation in Pinewood, with second-hand stories as its centerpiece. The proposal included funds for expansion, community programming, and a writer's residency program. "This has to be a mistake," Julia told Donna, scanning the figures with disbelief. "Or an elaborate scam." But the attorney she consulted confirmed the offer's legitimacy. "Your mysterious patron is very real and very serious about preserving your bookstore." After weeks of legal verification and cautious optimism, Julia agreed to meet the foundation's representative at the Grand Laurel, Pinewood's only luxury hotel. Expecting a lawyer or financial advisor, she was unprepared when a familiar figure rose from a corner table. Warren's appearance had transformed completely. The beard was now neatly trimmed, silver threading through the dark hair at his temples. His clothes spoke of tailored quality rather than necessity, but his eyes remained unchanged, thoughtful, with that same quiet intensity she remembered. "Hello, Julia." His voice carried the same gentle cadence, though confidence had replaced caution. She sank into the offered chair, momentarily speechless. "You're behind this foundation offer?" He nodded, studying her face. "I told you some debts can't be repaid with just money." 7 years without a word. And now you appear with, what? A financial rescue package? The shock was giving way to a complicated tangle of emotions. "What happened to you, Warren?" His story unfolded over tea that grew cold as Julia listened. After leaving Pinewood, Warren had sought treatment for PTSD through a veterans program. With stability came opportunity. An old colleague offered him a chance to work on an innovative affordable housing project. Warren's designs incorporated sustainability principles that attracted attention and investors. One successful project led to others. Now his architectural firm, Phoenix Designs, specialized in community revitalization projects worldwide. "Your bookstore saved me," he said simply. "Not just from that snowstorm, but from believing I had nothing left to offer. I've spent years looking for the right way to thank you." Julia's mind reeled with contradicting responses: gratitude, confusion, a lingering hint of abandonment. Why disappear completely? Not even a postcard? Warren's fingers unconsciously formed the creases of an invisible paper boat. "I needed to stand on my own before returning, to become someone who deserved—" He stopped, recalibrating. Someone who could help rather than needing help. Before Julia could respond, Warren placed a book on the table between them, a worn copy of her short story collection. "I've read this 14 times. Your lighthouse keeper story became something beautiful." The revelation that he'd followed her modest literary career pierced through Julia's carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't just about money or obligation. Something more complex flowed between them, a current that had never fully subsided despite years and distance. "The foundation offer stands regardless," Warren assured her, sensing her turmoil. "No strings attached, but I'm hoping you'll consider working with me on this vision. Secondhand stories could become something extraordinary for Pinewood." Julia looked at the man before her, no longer the broken soul who'd sheltered in her back room, but not quite a stranger either. The paper boat that had marked his departure still sat on her shelf, a miniature vessel bridging 7 years of separate journeys. "I need time to think," she said finally. Warren nodded, the architect's patience evident in his expression. Some designs require careful consideration. Take all the time you need. Foundations. The expansion plans for secondhand stories spread across Julia's kitchen table. Architectural renderings showing her modest bookshop transformed into a 3-story literary center with reading rooms, a cafe, and a rooftop garden for summer events. In Warren's vision, the original bookstore remained the heart of the building, its character preserved while everything around it grew. "It's the perfect metaphor," Donna remarked, examining the blueprints during their weekly wine night. "Your little bookshop surrounded by all these grand additions. Rather like you and Billionaire architect man." Julia rolled her eyes. "He's not." She paused. "Actually, I have no idea if he's a billionaire. We don't discuss his finances. Just the millions he wants to invest in your store." Donna raised an eyebrow. "Which you're still hesitating to accept because—" That was the question Julia asked herself during sleepless nights. In the month since Warren's return, they'd established a careful professional relationship. 3 meetings each week. Mondays for foundation planning, Wednesdays for bookstore redesign, Fridays for community program development. Each interaction remained cordial, focused, deliberate, neither acknowledging the undercurrent that hummed beneath their conversations. "I'm not hesitating about the foundation," Julia said finally. "I'm hesitating about him." Warren had purchased the long vacant building across from secondhand stories, the same doorway where Julia had found him during that snowstorm. He'd established temporary offices there while overseeing several projects in the region. Each morning, Julia watched him arrive precisely at 8, remembering a different man who once huddled in that same space. Their Wednesday meeting brought unexpected tension when Julia challenged a central element of the redesign. "This writing, residency space," she indicated the third-floor plans. "It's beautiful, but it overshadows everything else. The foundation should focus on readers first, writers second." Warren studied her with that penetrating gaze that always made her feel transparent. "You don't see yourself using this space." "That's not relevant." "It is." He leaned forward. "Julia, your lighthouse novel deserves to be finished. The world needs your stories." The statement unlocked something she'd carefully contained. "You don't get to disappear for 7 years and then return with opinions about my writing career," she said, voice tight with emotion. "You left without saying goodbye. Just a paper boat and cryptic note. I've apologized for that." "No, you've explained it. There's a difference." The distinction hung between them until Warren nodded slowly. "You're right." He gathered the disputed blueprints. "I'll revise these plans. And Julia, I am truly sorry for leaving the way I did." Their professional detente fractured. They avoided each other for a week. Julia found herself staring at her manuscript, untouched for months. While across the street, Warren's office lights burned late into the evening. The peace offering arrived on Tuesday, a stack of revised blueprints with the writing residency, reconfigured as a multi-purpose community space alongside a first-edition copy of East of Eden she'd mentioned wanting during his first stay. Inside the book, she found not another paper boat, but a paper lighthouse, exquisitely detailed with a tiny light that actually illuminated when touched. The note simply read, "Some stories take time to finish. I'm willing to wait." That evening, Julia crossed the street and entered Warren's office without announcement. He looked up from his drafting table, surprise evident. "I've been angry," she admitted, "not because you left, but because when you did, you took possibilities. With you. Possibilities I wasn't ready to acknowledge." Warren set down his pencil. "And now?" "Now I'm ready to build something. Not just the foundation or the bookstore, although yes to both, but something else too. Something we started 7 years ago and never properly explored." His smile began slowly, then transformed his entire face. "I believe the technical term for that is unfinished business." "I prefer unwritten chapters," Julia replied, finally allowing herself to smile back. Warren stood and crossed the room, stopping just short of touching her. "Julia Winters, would you consider collaborating on a new project? One without blueprints or guarantees, but with considerable potential?" She closed the remaining distance between them. "I believe I would, Mr. Architect. I believe I would." New chapters. The grand opening of the Pinewood Literary Center, housing the expanded second-hand stories, the community foundation offices, and spaces for everything from children's reading hours to senior writing workshops, coincided with the first snowfall of winter. Julia couldn't help but note the symmetry as she watched snowflakes dust the cobblestone walkway leading to the entrance. Nervous? Warren appeared beside her, offering coffee in her favorite mug, the chipped one from the original store that he'd insisted on preserving despite their renovation budget allowing for replacements. "Terrified," she admitted, accepting both coffee and the comfort of his presence. "What if no one comes?" His laugh, once so rare, now came easily. "Julia, the governor is cutting the ribbon in an hour. The local paper ran a front-page feature. Your author reading has been sold out for weeks." The reminder of her reading sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. After years of rejection, the lighthouse keeper's daughter had found a publisher, a respected mid-size press that specialized in literary fiction. Advance reviews called it hauntingly beautiful and a remarkable debut novel worth the wait. Warren's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. 18 months of working together, building together, and gradually living together had created a comfortable intimacy neither took for granted. "Remember when you found me in that doorway?" he asked, nodding toward the building across the street, now renovated as affordable apartments for artists and writers, another Phoenix Designs project. "I thought I'd reached my end. Instead, it was just an unexpected beginning. The ceremony unfolded like a dream, speeches from local officials, champagne toasts, and continuous exclamations as visitors explored the transformed space." Throughout it all, Julia found her gaze returning to the original section of secondhand stories, where Warren had installed a glass case displaying treasured artifacts. Her grandmother's photo, the paper boat he'd left years ago, and the lighthouse he'd created upon his return. "You've built something extraordinary here," commented Eleanor Sullivan, Julia's editor, during a quiet moment. "Both with these buildings and with your novel. Not many people get to see their different passions align so beautifully." Julia smiled, watching Warren across the room as he discussed design elements with architecture students from the community college. "I'm learning that the best stories aren't always the ones we plan." The evening's pinnacle arrived with Julia's reading. Standing at the podium in the community room, packed beyond capacity with locals and literary visitors alike, she found herself momentarily overwhelmed. Then her eyes met Warren's in the front row, and she began. "This novel began during a snowstorm," she explained, "when an act of simple kindness opened a door I didn't know existed. It evolved during separations and reunions, through paper boats and lighthouses, and finally found its form when I understood that some journeys aren't about reaching destinations but about building bridges between shores." Later, as the crowd dispersed and staff handled final cleanup, Julia and Warren escaped to the rooftop garden. Snow continued falling gently around them, catching in her hair and on his shoulders as they looked out over the town that had brought them together, torn them apart, and ultimately provided the foundation for their shared future. "I've been thinking about what's next," Warren said, his arm around her against the cold. "You just finished 2 major projects," Julia protested. "The Literary Center and the Artist Housing. Don't architects ever rest?" His smile held a hint of mischief. "I was thinking more personally than professionally." From his pocket, he produced not an origami creation, but a small velvet box. "Some designs are meant to last a lifetime." Julia's Breath caught as she opened it to find a ring whose central diamond was surrounded by tiny sapphires in the unmistakable pattern of a lighthouse. "I spent 7 years rebuilding myself," Warren said softly. "Then 18 months building this center with you. Now I'm asking if you'd consider our greatest collaboration yet." Snowflakes swirled around them as Julia's answer came not in words, but in the kiss that sealed promises both spoken and unspoken. Below them, through the skylight, the paper boat and lighthouse remained illuminated in their display case. Artifacts of a journey neither could have charted, but both had chosen to navigate together. In Pinewood, where their story began with a snowstorm and simple kindness, Julia and Warren embarked on their newest chapter. Architects of a shared life designed not with blueprints and measurements, but with patience, forgiveness, and the quiet understanding that sometimes, the most beautiful structures are those built slowly, with meticulous attention to both foundation and feeling.